The classic series of Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends is one of the most beloved facets of the entire franchise, and Season 4 is considered by many to be one of the best, if not the best season of the television series. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't cause a little controversy once in a while, and the episode usually at the center of these discussions is an odd little story called Rusty to the Rescue.
In springtime, Rusty loves to visit a faraway place.
The 15th episode of Season 4, Rusty to the Rescue, is the only episode from that season not to be based on a story from the Railway series. Well, not directly at least. The episode bridges the narrow gauge and standard gauge stories of the season by kicking off the Stepney the Bluebell Engine arc. In this 4-episode arc, Rusty to the Rescue is the only episode not taken directly from the Railway series book of the same name. The first story of the Railway series book, Stepney the Bluebell Engine, is called Bluebells of England, and shows Percy and Douglas discussing the real-life Bluebell Railway and its most famous engine, Stepney. Elements of this story are sprinkled throughout Rusty to the Rescue and the following episode, Thomas and Stepney, but most of the original Railway series story was dropped. And to be honest, that's kind of for the best. Bluebells of England is highly informative and a highly informational story, telling the real-life story of Stepney and the Bluebell Railway. This is just fine for a children's book and does well to increase awareness of that special railway, but it doesn't lend itself particularly well to the screen. The story is slow and there isn't much action, so I can understand why Britt Allcroft and David Mitton would want to take Stepney's TV series story in a new direction. And guess what? The Reverend Audrey hated this episode. Well, I can't actually find any source that says it was this story in particular, but we know he didn't like Season 4 as a whole, and he despised Britt and David's Season 3 episodes, most famously Henry's Forest. So it stands to reason that he wasn't a fan of this radical departure from his source material. But considering how straight most of Season 4 gleans to the Railway series books, it makes sense to me that a lot of his problems with the season would stem from this episode. But that's enough background. Let's take a look at the actual episode and see if it holds up or if they should have stuck to the Reverend Audrey's original narrative.
In springtime, Rusty loves to visit a faraway place. It's filled with bluebells. The air smells sweet, and Rusty thinks there is no better place to be.
Right out the gate, we get a major, radical, and I mean radical departure from the Railway series and, in fact, from reality itself. That being that the Bluebell Railway is on Sodor, rather than in England. This was obviously done so the plot of the episode makes, well, any semblance of sense. But in reality, it is, like I said, a major departure from the source material and the real-life railway in England. Personally, I'm not offended by this change, however I do understand the idea that it takes attention away from the real-life Bluebell Railway and the incredible work they do. But when it really boils down to it, I totally understand why they made this adaptive change. So Rusty's driver says they need another engine to help run the line, and Rusty decides he's going to find one. Naturally, he goes to Douglas, who saved Oliver from scrap. I like this little callback to Escape. It creates a nice sense of continuity within the TV series, and that's something I am always a sucker for.
Rusty told the driver all about the plan. And that night, he came back to the shed.
In the next scene, Rusty and his driver make their plan to visit the other railway and find a new engine. This is perhaps where the episode's strongest elements come into play, this being the idea that a diesel engine wants to save a steam engine from scrap. So often we see the Steamies versus Diesels rivalry, and this makes for a really fresh change of pace, even though it sort of came before all that Steamies versus Diesels stuff. It's so cool to see a character that cares so sincerely about steam engines, despite not being one himself, and it creates a great, and I mean great, message about helping out those who aren't like yourself and caring for those you don't know personally. So Rusty heads to the other railway, and by God, every shot in this montage is absolutely gorgeous. Every single shot has a distinctive location, and I think it's a nice touch that the scenery goes from full daylight to pitch black nighttime in just a few shots. A very clever way to make Rusty's journey seem long and laborious. Once we get to the other railway, good lord is the atmosphere perfect. The faceless diesels always fascinated me as a kid, since I knew who they were, but without faces, they're rather creepy and unsettling. They become quite different. This is a very, very effective use of recycling props.
Oh, what's that? But it was only the sounds of the lonely scrapyard. Diesels, silent and still, lined up on guard.
Who are you?
Rusty plucked up courage. I'm a shed and sidings inspection diesel. Have you any engines in the shed?
No, none.
Rusty rallied again. Then what about the sidings?
One. We have one.
I also particularly want to highlight George Carlin's narration here, which adds so much power and gravity to this scene. His disembodied diesel voice is just incredible, and the voice, combined with the faceless diesels and creepy scrap engines, creates a perfect atmosphere for this scene. I would argue here that the atmosphere is even better than Escape, and believe me, that is a high bar to clear.
But it was only the sounds of the lonely scrapyard. Diesels, silent and still, lined up on guard.
The little diesel eventually comes across Stepney and asks him a pretty weird question about bluebells.
Do you like bluebells? The engine looked startled. Yes, bluebells are beautiful.
And without a moment of hesitation, Stepney decides to go with him. I will admit, it's pretty weird that Stepney just happens to have a driver and fireman ready to go, but I'm just gonna let that slide because I feel like it's nitpicking. Although he looks absolutely fabulous in that scarf. The two engines set off for Sodor, giving us an almost shot-for-shot remake of Escape, and an iconic Mitten side-on long shot. Seriously, he loved these. So Rusty and Stepney arrive back on Sodor to a crowd of cheers and whistles. Although how all those engines and people knew Rusty was going on this mission, or that it was even going to be a success, has always been a mystery to me. I don't know, maybe his driver called ahead. So that's Rusty to the rescue, and after all these years, I don't really get why this episode is so controversial. This episode has fascinated me since I was a little kid. It was only available on a VHS tape, which I never owned, but rented once or twice over the years. As I got older, I learned about the controversy behind it and how far it wanders from the Railway series, and that only heightened my fascination with it. Sure, it's not the same as the Railway series, but that doesn't mean it's bad. Different doesn't always mean bad, for that matter. If there's a good story and a good message behind it, it doesn't matter how far it strays from the source material in my mind, so long as it's true to the characters and ideas of the original. Just about everything in this episode works, although admittedly it does retread Escape quite a bit, but we should not act like that is the first or last time something like that would happen. There are a lot of repeats in this series. So is the episode worth the controversy? I don't think so. Like what you like, dislike what you dislike, I don't care. Well, as long as it lines up with my views, of course. And while you're at it, check out the Bluebell Railway's website and social media. Better yet, pay them a visit if you're in the area. They're a great railway with a great history, and they need visitor dollars to help keep engines like Stepney up and running. That's all for today. Keep your petty arguments to yourself, and I'll see you next time.